fact that he wasn't very bright. Ace owned a lot of Nazi memorabilia. Now, I'm sure there are people who collect that stuff who aren't Nazis or anti-Semites, but Ace was not one of them. Barely below the surface of the band's interactions was a simmering and ongoing resentment and anger directed at me and Gene. We ran the band and wrote almost all the songs and generated the ideas, not because KISS was a dictatorship, but because the other guys' contributions just didn't amount to much. Their jealousy and envy and resentment got focused on the most tangible thing they could pin it on, the fact that Gene and I both happened to be Jewish. It wasn't that different from the core of society's anti-Semitism. Take Jewish immigrants out of their native soil and put them in a new country, and the next generation becomes doctors. That's hard for certain people to take, and so it was inside the band. Ace, and particularly Peter, felt powerless and impotent when faced with the tireless focus, drive, and ambition of me and Gene. As a result, the two of them tried to sabotage the band, which, as they saw it, was unfairly manipulated by those money-grubbing Jews. Casablanca put us up in the Chateau Marmont and rented 2 Chevys for us to drive around town. We would pile into the cars and go to Denny's or McDonald's. I roomed with Ace in a 2-story bungalow off in a private section of the grounds. Gene roomed with Peter. Each bungalow had 2 levels and several bedrooms and bathrooms. The first day, Ace went out for a walk, and I decided to take a shower. While I was in there, the bathroom started to smell horrible. I pulled open the curtain to see what it could be, and there was Ace sitting on the toilet taking a dump. He looked up. "What are you doing in here?" I yelled. There were other bathrooms in the place, after all. He just shrugged. Ace was odd. Drinking more heavily or doing drugs didn't appeal to me. I never wanted to lose control. Ace was an alcoholic, but in the beginning he stayed sober until after the show, at which point it was normal for him to drink until he was unable to stand. One night I found him crawling down the hall of a motel on all fours, talking to himself. "What are you doing, man?" I asked him. "I've got my little people with me," he said, gesturing around himself. As I tried to get past him, he said, "Oh, you just stepped on one." In some ways it was pathetic, but in other ways I have to say it was funny. Only later did it become ugly. Once he mixed in Valium and cocaine, it wasn't as funny anymore. At one point, Ace got the nickname the Chef. One night while we were sitting in front of our mirrors putting on our makeup, Peter walked up behind Ace and put his dick on his shoulder. Ace very nonchalantly turned to the side and gave it a kiss. So he became the Chef, because he had to taste everything. We also called Ace Scraps back then because he often reached across the table and took stuff off our plates. "Are you eating that?" he'd ask, and then grab. If someone had shrimp, Ace would eat the tails you left on the plate. Sometimes in motels, he would rummage through discarded room service trays as we walked down the hallways. Ace was increasingly self-destructive in a way that chipped away at his talent. One night he repeatedly drove his rental car down a steep winding road to see how fast he could go and still make the turn at the bottom. The ultimate outcome of the experiment would have been obvious to anyone but an inebriated Ace. And sure enough, he finally lost control of the car and wrapped it around a pole. We weren't yet to the point where we had to desperately try to get a solo out of him before he passed out in the studio, although that would soon come. But he certainly wasn't fully realizing his potential and giving his all. We made it out as if we lived like the Help-era Beatles and all made music together as equals. But that was never the case. And who should know that better than the people who were actually there and not contributing? Peter and Ace's contributions were never as substantial as we made them out to be in the press. The fact of the matter was that 2 guys, Gene and me, were the engineers and motivators and did 80% of the work. Unfortunately, when we decided to create the help illusion, we never considered the possibility that Peter and Ace would start to actually believe it and that their belief would bite us in the ass. But sure enough, their delusion started to create resentment and eventually fatal fissures in the band. Those fissures first started opening during Destroyer, as Peter struggled to record a song that was ostensibly his own, and we began to have to work around Ace, who spent much of the recording process with his priorities far from where they belonged. He sometimes played his parts with his rings and chains scraping against the fretboard and pickups and then wanted to quit for the day and take off. When I would ask him to remove the jewelry and do another take because of all the noise, he would say, Hey, that's rock and roll. No, Ace, that's shit.